The first video in this series covered 5 theory topics. This one finishes the remaining theory content, the 2 syllabus sections we haven't touched yet, hardware and software and monitoring and control. 7 topics in total this time because both sections have real documented substance across every one of their subsections, and none of it deserves to be compressed just to fit a smaller number. Same approach as always. The concept, taught properly, the mistake Cambridge's examiners have actually documented, and a full exam-level question solved step by step. Let's start with the difference between 2 machines people mix up constantly. Both machines are enormous by ordinary standards, but they're built for opposite jobs. Supercomputers are optimized for raw, intensive calculation, one huge problem at a time. Mainframes are optimized for reliability at scale, huge numbers of transactions processed without ever going down. Here's the first documented finding. Asked to compare mainframes and supercomputers by processing type and processor design, very few responses showed real understanding of that distinction. The two get treated as interchangeably very powerful, instead of built for genuinely different jobs. Here's the second. Asked why mainframes process a national census, most responses just said there's a lot of data. That's true, but it misses the actual point. A census has a hard deadline, and the data volume grows every cycle. That's what actually demands mainframe scale, fault-tolerant processing, not the data volume on its own. Here is your exam-level question. Explain the key difference in what mainframes and supercomputers are each optimized to do. Then explain why a national census specifically needs mainframe processing. Beyond simply, there's a lot of data. Pause it and name the actual deadline and growth reasoning before you check the solution. Here is the solution. Supercomputers are built for processing-intensive calculation, weather modeling, scientific simulation, one enormous computational problem at a time. Mainframes are built for reliability and continuous availability at huge transactional scale, banking, airline bookings, a census, where the system genuinely cannot go down. And the census specifically, it isn't just the volume of data, it's that the count happens on a fixed deadline, the population, and therefore the data volume grows every cycle, and the processing has to complete reliably regardless. That combination of scale, deadline, and reliability is a mainframe's exact specialty. System software is everything that manages the computer itself, rather than doing a specific job for the user. The operating system, device drivers, and the compilers and interpreters that translate the programs we write into something the machine can run. Here's the first documented finding. Most candidates think a device driver is a piece of hardware. It isn't. It's software. The specific software that lets the operating system communicate with a specific piece of hardware. Here's the second, and it's a genuine mix-up between 2 related terms. Most candidates wrongly attribute an interpreter's behavior to a compiler, believing a compiler retranslates the source code every single time the program runs. It doesn't. A compiler translates once into machine code tied to one specific operating system. That's an interpreter's job, translating line by line every run. Here is your exam-level question. State what a device driver actually is, not hardware. Then explain why a program compiled for one operating system won't simply run on a different one. Here is the solution. A device driver is software, a specific translation layer that lets the operating system communicate correctly with a specific piece of hardware, like a printer or a graphics card. And a compiled program, compiling translates the source code once directly into machine code specific to one operating system's instruction set. Move that compiled file to a different operating system, and there's nothing there that system knows how to run. It would need recompiling for that system specifically, or an interpreter instead, translating freshly each time. Utility software does specific maintenance jobs for the system. Backup, compression, disk defragmentation, formatting. Each one a distinct task, not interchangeable with the others. Here's the first documented finding. Asked specifically about the decisions behind backing up data, candidates drift into discussing compression instead, off the actual question asked, even though compression is a real related utility. Here's the second. Asked to explain compression's actual technical impact, candidates can name lossy and lossless compression, but can't explain what either one actually does to the file. Here is your exam-level question. State 2 decisions that need making before backing up data held on a server, staying on backup, not drifting into compression. Then explain the real difference between lossy and lossless compression's effect on an audio file. Here is the solution. Backup decisions. What to back up and how often, and where the backup itself is physically or digitally stored, separate from the original. Neither of those is a compression question. Compression, when it is actually asked about, lossless compression shrinks the file with no loss of quality at all. The original can be perfectly reconstructed. Lossy compression shrinks it much further by permanently discarding some of the original data, trading a smaller file for a small, real loss in audio quality. Two genuinely different trade-offs, not just two names for the same thing. 3 topics down. Notice something specific in all 3. A mainframe confused with a supercomputer, a device driver called hardware, a backup question answered with a compression answer. In every case, the concept itself wasn't the hard part. Knowing exactly where one category ends and the next one begins was. That's about to matter twice more. Custom-written software is built specifically for one organization. Off-the-shelf software is built once and sold to many. Neither one is simply the better option. Each trades away something the other one has. Here's the first documented finding. A large number of candidates believe custom-written software automatically gets better support because the programmer has direct, unfettered access. That's not actually true. And separately, most candidates miss that off-the-shelf software, because of its far larger number of sales, has typically been tested by far more real users than custom-written software ever will be. Here's the second, and it's a command word issue. Asked to justify custom-written software, candidates give both supporting and opposing arguments. Justify means make the case for it. A balanced answer, weighing both sides, doesn't meet what that command word is actually asking for. Here is your exam-level question. A company is deciding between custom-written and off-the-shelf software. Explain which is actually more likely to have been more thoroughly tested and why. Then justify, arguing one side only, the case for custom-written software specifically. Pause it and check whether your justify answer secretly hedges with the other side before you continue. Here is the solution. Off-the-shelf software is the one more likely to be thoroughly tested, not because it's inherently better built, but because its far larger number of buyers means far more real-world use and far more opportunities for bugs to surface and get fixed. Custom-written software, by contrast, is often tested by a much smaller group before release, and to justify custom-written software specifically means making its case only. It's built exactly to the organization's own processes, with no unnecessary features paid for or maintained, and support can be shaped around the organization's specific needs. A real justification argues one side. It doesn't hedge with the other. A user interface is how a person actually interacts with the system. And different interfaces suit genuinely different situations, not just different tastes. Here is the documented finding on this topic. Asked how a gesture-based interface specifically benefits users with disabilities. In a hospital scenario, few candidates gave any real explanation beyond restating that a gesture-based interface exists. Here is your exam-level question. A hospital installs a gesture-based interface so surgeons can control imaging equipment during surgery without touching a keyboard. Explain specifically how this benefits a surgeon whose hands must stay sterile, not just what a gesture-based interface is. Here is the solution. The specific benefit is sterility, not convenience. A surgeon's hands must stay sterile throughout the procedure. Touching a keyboard or a mouse would immediately break that sterility, and re-scrubbing costs real-time mid-surgery. A gesture-based interface lets the surgeon control the imaging equipment, zooming, rotating, scrolling through scans, without touching anything at all, so sterility is never broken and the procedure is never interrupted. That specific reason, tied to this specific scenario, is the answer, not a general description of how gesture interfaces work. 5 topics down, 2 to go. And these last 2, monitoring and control, are where this syllabus gets genuinely practical. real sensors, real actuators, real systems making real decisions. The documented mistakes here are almost all the same shape, naming the component correctly, but not explaining what it actually does. Watch for that pattern one more time. A sensor's entire job is to detect a physical condition, temperature, light, motion, distance, and convert it into data the system can process. It detects. It never produces the condition itself. Here's the first documented finding in two separate forms. Ultrasonic sensors get wrongly linked to prenatal ultrasound scanning, a completely different use of similar underlying technology. And separately, sensors get described as emitting sound or heat, when a sensor's actual job is the opposite, detecting, not emitting. Here's the second, calibration explained by simply repeating the question's own wording back. 2-point calibration is based on 2 points, instead of actually explaining what calibrating against 2 known reference points achieves. Here is your exam level question. A greenhouse uses an infrared sensor to monitor temperature. Explain what the sensor actually does, not what it emits. Then explain what calibrating it against 2 known reference temperatures actually achieves, without just restating the term. Here is the solution. The infrared sensor detects heat radiating from the greenhouse environment and converts that into a temperature reading. It does not emit heat itself. And calibrating against 2 known reference temperatures, the sensor's readings are checked against 2 points whose real temperatures are already known. And any difference between the sensor's reading and the true value is used to correct the sensor's readings across its whole range. Not just restating that 2 points were used, but explaining that the comparison is what corrects the sensor's accuracy. A control system reads sensor input, decides what should happen, and then an actuator actually makes that happen in the physical world. Opening a barrier, switching a light, adjusting a valve. Here's the first documented finding. Candidates can state that an actuator provides output, but a significant proportion can't explain what that actually means in a real system. Output here means physical movement or action, not a number on a screen. Here's the second, and it's the same pattern documented for the digital divide in the first video. Consequences discussed in vague generalities. A car park barrier system causing unemployment with no specific identification of which workers are actually affected or how. Here is your exam level question. An automatic car park barrier system replaces manual ticket attendance. Explain what the actuator in this system actually does. Then explain specifically which workers' roles are affected and how, not just that some people lose their jobs. Here is the solution. The actuator is the component that physically raises and lowers the barrier itself once the control system has decided a vehicle should be allowed through. It's the part that turns a decision into real, physical movement. And specifically, the ticket attendants who previously issued and checked tickets by hand are the workers directly affected. Their role is removed entirely, replaced by the automatic system reading a ticket or number plate directly. Naming that specific role, not a vague "some jobs are lost," is what turns a generic answer into a real one. 7 topics. Mainframes and supercomputers, system software, utility software, custom versus off-the-shelf software, user interfaces, monitoring technologies, control technologies. Combined with the 5 from the first video, that's the complete theory-only AS content on this syllabus. Each one built the same way. The concept taught properly, and the mistake Cambridge's own examiners have actually documented, not guessed at. If there's one thread running through all 12 topics across both videos, it's this. Examiners keep finding candidates who can name a component, a term, a category, but can't explain what it actually does or apply it to the specific case in front of them. Naming isn't explaining. Do that consistently, and you're ready for this syllabus's theory paper. Search Cambridge IT on StudyRevise for the rest of this series, and I'll see you in the next one.